You, Joshua. And now let's start with what everyone is waiting for. So, Sue Bolton, product coach from Service New South Wales, ex-Netflix. Please come here and let's introduce yourself. Big round of applause.
I don't need that. I've got this.
Just 1 second, Sue. Just need to fix our community badge.
I had it on upside down.
And just gonna say, everyone, you can get our Figma community badge on the desk over here later. Thank you.
All right. So hello, how are we, friends of Figma? I'm interested to know how many of you are designers versus product managers versus engineers. Product managers, put your hands up. Oh, we've got one. We've got two. Great. Designers. Everyone in the room. Yeah. Engineers. Any? Not one? One, two, yay, fabulous. Glad to see you here. So welcome to tonight. As you heard, my name's Sue Bolton and I have spent the last 17 years in the US working at companies like Netflix, McGraw-Hill Companies and Lionsgate. I have spent a long career working through different types of product roles, from product management to product ownership, technical product management to business product management, product marketing management, and then leading a very, very large team of product, program, and project at Netflix, and we were localizing the product. So it was my team that took us to 32 different languages, and we built the back-end products that made localization fast, easy, and driven by large language models and machine learning. And we built that in 2014, 2015. And so that took a lot of discovery. So I know that AI and large language models is a thing now, but these FANGs are often working 10 years in advance, right? So they're doing a lot of testing and discovery, which is your ballywig as designers, right? And now I have my own coaching business, very much an encore career for me. I'm facing the end of my career just because I say so, and because I want to give back. I've learned a lot, either through making really large mistakes myself, and don't you learn a lot when you make mistakes, because you get yourself reflected back, right? And I've learned from really fabulous colleagues, and I now want to give back, absolutely. So we're going to talk tonight about the transformation of the industry, and it's come a long way since the 1900s, where we had brand men back in the day of the advertising men, right? And they owned the entire product, from marketing to delivery to everything. And then we moved into those days of waterfall, and I don't know how many of you were in the industry back then. I was. And so it was days where we spent hours collecting requirements, hefty requirements, which you would write all this intense documentation for. And then you'd go into 2 years of coding, and then you'd release the product and the customer would say, it's not what we wanted, right? And so we moved from that, and then Scrum came out and all the Agile Manifesto. And you know, we were in companies, back then I was at McGraw-Hill in New York, and we went from waterfall to what I would call Wagile. It was kind of that combination hybrid of a bit of waterfall, a bit of Agile. And then we moved to Agile with the 5 ceremonies, or with Lean or XP, or combinations of that, right? And we got a little faster. But here comes SAFe, here comes Less and Nexus and Agile at Scale. Who's working with all those frameworks right now? Anyone? No one? Oh, a couple of you. And with that, doesn't all the joy and creativity get sucked out of the room, right? As you have to follow these really heavy processes. And interestingly, Netflix did a lot of research into the correlation between innovation and hefty process. The more hefty your process, the less innovation, the less agile you become. And so if you look at something like Netflix, they don't establish processes for the sake of processes. You're never going to see frameworks like SAFe there, or Less, or Nexus, or any of those large agile frameworks. because that is process over people. And at Netflix, they focus on people over process, right? And so we've then come across, we've had IDEO release their Double Diamond, which you guys would know inside and out. Marty Kagan with all his book, and he's just come out with a new one. He was here in Sydney last week promoting his new book, Transformed. Who's read it? Hey, a couple of you, right? And we're now over here, we've had books like The Lean Startup, which really talked about that minimal viable product and making sure that we're doing a lot more testing and getting products out fast, getting that validation out fast. So we've changed a lot, right? And we've moved from this project thinking to hopefully product thinking. And there are 6 elements where we differ significantly, right? Very much in terms of mindset. As product first people, we lean into the unpredictability, the ambiguity. And that's where you as designers really come to the forefront with skills around discovery, around testing, experimentation and research, hopefully partnering deeply with your product managers. And one of the things I see in Australia is there's a lot of pitching over the fence from product managers over to you guys. And that's not how it should be. Like, you guys should be connected at the hip with your product people and with your engineers, rather than this pitching over the fence. And it's not fair on you guys that they're doing that, right? And so there's some unpicking we have to do in that area. In terms of investment and budget, as product people, it's all about investing over time, building capabilities over time, right? It's testing and iterating and learning and building and testing some more. Over here on the project, it's that short-term budget allocation. Certainly in government, I work with Service New South Wales and Department of Revenue. Over here, it's all about budget allocation. Now, with budget allocation and project thinking, what you're going to see is a lot of tech debt, because the investment, the mental investment, the ownership into the code is not there, because they roll on and roll off, right? It's just not there. In terms of success, we're all about value. Now, in the industry, there's a lot of debate between designers and product people around, we own value, right? Have you heard that? What a fabulous problem to have, where everyone decides they own value, right? If we can get engineers, designers, and product managers into the room having the discussion around what value is and how we deliver value, value for the organization, value for the customer, the user, value for market efficiency, all of that, that's a great problem to have. Because in a balanced team or a product triad, whatever you want to call it, a product trio, triad, whatever, inside of that, you all own it together. It's not about this is my job versus your job, it's our job. We collectively decide on how to solve those problems, right? Big difference to what happens over here. We're certainly also outcome focused. Who works on outcomes versus feature lists? Yay! How many of you are still working as feature factories? So many of us, right? And doesn't that just like break your heart? But it takes effort to move a team or an organisation that way. It really does. In terms of measurement, in terms of, team structure, we're all about the product and the value. Over here, it's functions and departments. And then lastly, it's about encouraging team autonomy. It's pushing the decisions to the people who own and know that infrastructure, that tech stack, right? That's where the decision should sit, not with people who are miles away from the product. And if you look at decision making and their understanding of the product from the CEO to the people on the team who own the product, it goes from 4% understanding with the CEO to 100% understanding with the people on the team. And so it's really important that the team has autonomy. The reality is often we don't, right? So, we know the project model doesn't work. There's been a lot of studies by Google and Microsoft, by Slack and Pendo, by Harvard, that highlight, and this is consistent across industries, across products, that 80% of features released out into the wild are never used or rarely touched. 80%. That's a lot of wastage of this talent, right? So what can we do about it? So back in 2012, Microsoft had this employee that came up with a really cool idea about highlighting search ads inside of Bing. That little idea sat on the backlog for 6 months. 6 months, because the product person didn't think it was a priority. Those damn product people. They didn't think it was a priority until an engineer came along and looked at it and thought, that's not much time for me to code. I'm going to code it and put it out as an A/B test. And he did. It pushed it out as an A/B test. That A/B test set up an alert, something is wrong alert, that went to all the senior execs, and they looked into what's going on here, because it came back with a 12% statistically significant impact. So what this is highlighting is how important discovery is, right? To ideas. We have to test them. We have to validate them. We have to get out of our own perception and opinions about whether something will work or not into going out to our users and validating and testing and getting perspective and hard data, right? It's really critical. And this right here is your ballywig. We also know, like I said, high tech debt with the project model. So discovery is your friend, testing, experimentation. I do call them out as separate. I know that people bucket them all in one. That's just the Netflix thinking, which I can go into later. But then Marty Kagan comes out with his 20 principles, right? And this is his book, Transformed. This is how pretty much Netflix works. There are some differences, but reading this doesn't tell you how to do this, does it? Like, these are great, but what does that look like every single day in action? So we're going to take a look at that. And the first thing, the very underpinning, is the culture of the organisation, right? And the culture is really a set of values expressed as behaviours and actions. And I would add a series of conversations that you have within the organisation with each other. Now at Netflix, the culture was a living, everyday document. These were the principles that embedded itself. It was talked about every single day. The leaders within the organisation were the keepers of the culture. And every week, you might choose a principle to talk about with your team or a value to talk about. Every year, senior leadership would choose a principle or a value to talk about, right? So there was this constant livingness to it. Now, this culture is what creates psychological safety. So if I was to call out, what does trust mean to any one of you? Call out. What do you think it means? Great. Anything else? Safety. One other. Value, right? So notice we all have a different interpretation of what trust means. And if you as an organisation just stop at your values, how in hell are you going to expect people's behaviour to align unless you as an organisation start to explicitly call out these values as behaviours? Like at Netflix, if you look at integrity, integrity was about saying to, if you have something to say about a person, you would say it to their face. You would never talk about them behind their back. And whatever you say, you have to say to their face, right? That's integrity. It's also about doing what you said you would do, by when you said you would, in the way you know it should be done. Like they explicitly called every single one of these out as behaviours. Now, when you do that, you get alignment across the organisation, right? I'm going to go back to the principles. The principles were fabulous. They very much pushed autonomy right down to the teams. The senior leadership teams did not make the decisions. Individuals on teams made decisions. What senior leaders did was set context. They shared information, they shared more information, and they shared more information. It's probably the most transparent organisation I have ever worked for. They shared everything, unless they were laying someone off. And then they would never share that. That sat with senior leaders, right? But everything was transparent, everything. And the reason why is good decision making happens inside of good context. And as people on teams, we make better decisions if we understand the bigger picture, right? Now, informed captains is a great concept, and it's all around who has the most understanding of that thing. Who's the keeper of that decision? And the decision floats depending on who is the keeper of that understanding. It could be the designer, right? If it's a design decision, or if it's a research decision, then they're the informed captain. And there was a structure. We used a structure where you would debate. You, as a leader, you would get the team and farm for that debate. Because when you hear all sides, you can make a good decision once you've heard all sides. You can't unless you've heard it, right? So you'd farm for debate, and then you would check who aligns. Who aligns or doesn't really agree but can align for the sake of the team. Because it's not about your individual agenda. It's about what was best for Netflix. What's best for them, so that you can collectively align for that bigger goal, right? And then over here, it's about seeking excellence. Who sees a lot of quiet quitting on their team? Right? It's a problem nowadays. Notice that inside of quiet quitting, your actions and your performance is conditional. It's conditional based on your interpretation of whether you got the promotion, you got the job, you got the budget, you got the validation, you got the kudos. And if you got that, you're happy and you'll perform. If you didn't get that, it's like, stuff you, I'm just doing the bare minimum, right? That's quiet quitting. But imagine a world where you're just striving for excellence because that's who you are, because you're going to grow from that. And when you grow from that, you're going to learn new skills. And as you learn new skills, you're actually going to open the door for new opportunities. So striving for excellence is all about your own personal integrity and your personal brand, and achieving those things you want to achieve regardless of the conditions around you. Whether you get the promotion or not, strive for excellence anyway, because that's who you are, right? Freedom and responsibility, that's a big one. And there were no policies. Netflix didn't have policies. Sorry, safety culture, I know that's a big area. But we didn't have policies. We didn't have holiday policies. We didn't sit through 1,000 hours of HR training. But it was reliant on us exhibiting those 10 values. And if you didn't, you would get a healthy package and out the door you'd go. There was no performance review. You just got fired and you got a package, right? And that happened very, very regularly. Within the first year, if you weren't exhibiting this culture, you were out the door. Like, we weeded them out really quickly, and that's the hard reality of a performance culture like that, right? All right. So, let's look at the other principles in action. And I say this all the time. Everything starts with a vision, including your own personal life or your family. Who does the family or individual vision? Anyone? No one? Yeah, you do. It's worthwhile doing, because if you don't, guess what? You're just going to react to life, bouncing around. Whereas when you create a vision, you actually put a hard stake in the ground saying, this is where I'm going. And it differs from making New Year's resolutions quite dramatically, right? So everything starts with a vision, including your product. Now, who has a product vision that they're working inside of? Fabulous, quite a few of you. Back in the old days, it was the product manager who sat in a room and wrote that product vision. Is that still going on? Yeah. It's moved since then. So the way I look at it is it's a collaborative endeavour. And you as designers and the engineers, you should be in the room having this conversation. Because it's the conversation, the dialogue, where you will build alignment and you will hear the strategy. So if your product manager's still writing it in a room, there's some nudging we need to do, because it is a collaborative team effort and it's a discussion where you decide as a team this over that. It's as much about saying no to something as it is saying yes. Because if everything's a priority, then nothing is a priority. So you've got to say no to a bunch of things, right? Very much so. And you've got to get to outcomes. So your vision and your strategy leads to outcomes. And this is where we do it a little differently at Netflix, right? We focus on 3 strategic goals. Do we do OKRs? Not at this level, never at this level. And there's a lot of debate about where OKRs should sit, if they sit in here at all, because OKRs, the thing you've got to watch with them is your results can actually be deliverables that shut down discovery. So you want to make sure that if you use OKRs, they sit at the outcome level and they open up discovery. They're not a deliverable, right? They're going to enable that and foster that thinking, that testing, that discovery. So watch out for that. And then discovery itself. How I wish there was more partnership in this area. Who's been to New York? Fabulous. Have you seen in all of the residential skyscrapers, the big buildings, that there's mirrors near every single lift well? Yeah? The reason why was back in the 1920s when they built these buildings, the residents started to complain about how long the elevators took to get to them. And so they then looked into, well, can we get faster elevators? And so they got these engineers in and more architects, and they were looking at spending millions of millions to replace these elevators. And then they got a young architecture student who came and sat in these little areas and just watched people and timed the elevators. That's all he did. Research in action, right? And what he said was, they're bored. They have nothing to do except focus on how long this elevator takes to get there. And so they installed mirrors in every single one of these buildings. They installed mirrors. And these people now are busy fixing their hair, putting on lipstick, and didn't even notice the time it took for that elevator to get there. And it saved them millions of dollars. So it's a really great example of discovery in action, right? And leaning into that, and really leaning into pushing your product managers to connect with you, because you should be putting a discovery plan together, right? Because discovery and research and testing, it's a very tangled web and it's complex. It's not easy to do, right? And so the discovery plan, do it together. The opportunity analysis, that's in their ballywig. The problem framing, have the discussion as a team, because that's the core thing to identify, is what problem are we actually solving here? Is it the elevator or is it the boredom, right? The problem is the key area, and you've got to get into a dialogue around that, and I don't see that as often as I'd wish, right? So that partnership, and then learn to push on each other, debate, 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 debate. Say what needs to be said, even if it's uncomfortable, right? Say what needs to be said. And then delivery, like the more we can get teams to move to CI/CD, the more you can move towards really rigorous A/B testing as experiments, hitting statistical significance, right? Pushing out little micro releases, kind of like what Netflix are doing now. They're testing their new UI. I don't know how many of you have been allocated that new test, but there is a new UI coming, right? And so they will aim to do 1 to 1.5% of their total population. So they've got about 250 million users. That's nearly 4 million people who are allocated A/B tests. And they will do micro releases. We did tests on, you know, the CVV on the credit card? We tested that. No one noticed. No longer do you have to put that in when you're joining as a member. It's not necessary. Do you remember the 5 stars for whether you like the show? That went, now it's thumbs up, thumbs down with the one with the 2, right? So it's those little micro tests and micro releases. Now at Netflix, nothing, and I mean nothing, gets released unless it's been tested and we hit statistical significance. Nothing. In the early days, we didn't do so many tests, like A/B tests. We did things like paper prototypes. We went out to San Diego in the early days of streaming with a paper prototype, yanking passers-by, asking them what they thought of this. So it can be as simple as that, right? Or as sophisticated as a rigorous statistical experiment with hypotheses. I can't say that, there you go. And underpinning all of it is balanced teams, product trios, I've heard trines, I've heard triads, whatever that looks like. And often design, sometimes I've seen a lot of this, is a service group, not in the team. I'd love if you were all embedded in the team, right? Working on the product with the engineers and the product managers. And it's really very much around collaboration and co-ownership, like owning all the decisions together, because each single person brings a different lens, right? Desirability, viability, feasibility. You bring a different lens. And in the discussion together about the path forward, you're going to see the best path forward, right? And then, I don't know how many of you have read 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Read Hastings' favourite book. He makes everyone read it, everyone. But this talks about the 5 dysfunctions that get in the way of becoming a high-performing team. Embedded at the bottom of it is trust. And trust has 2 aspects to it. Number 1 is that vulnerability-based trust. Feeling okay to say what needs to be said without being minimised. And secondly is that operational-based trust, which is your culture, right? So, any questions? That was 20 minutes, right? 25.
25 is not work. 25. Okay, let's switch to different slide, and now we have some Q&A time.
Perfect.
You can stay here with me. So there is a question over here. I just need the microphone. I lost my microphone, guys. Cool.
Who was it?
The cap.
Sorry, Sue, I'm just looking at my notes.
Yeah.
Oh, so just in regards to, you know, the Netflix principles,
Yeah.
my question was that, like, if you're relatively new as a designer and you go into an environment, what's your advice if you can't, you know, within the, say, the first couple of months, what's your advice to someone who's literally read all those principles, thought this is great, this is the place for me, and then they don't see them in the workplace? What's your advice for them, either saying they don't exist or I'm just not looking hard enough?
Yeah, and often in companies, you get onboarded, don't you, and HR shares the values and then nothing else after that. And depending on the company, you can either challenge the leadership team and have direct conversations around, can we work further to break down these values into behaviours that we all align to, right? I'm doing a lot of that at government right now. Depends on the organisation. So if it's a very large, old organisation, you possibly will not get anywhere, right? And so you yourself have to determine, is this the right organisation for me? Because it's ultimately about integrity, and there are 4 layers of integrity, right? Just in case. Number 1 is keeping your promises. Number 2 is honouring the words that come out of your mouth, regardless of whether you can keep your promises or not. It means you clean up if you break a promise. You have conversations with people. Number 3 is living a life in alignment with your values. Now, I don't know how many of you have done the work to identify your own values, but the sweet spot is when you find an organisation where your values align to the organisation's values. I tell you, magic happens inside of that. You'll find passion inside of that. And so ultimately, I would say it's about making that decision around, is this culture the right fit for me or not? If you can push to change it. So at Netflix, you know, there's companies that you'll walk past a piece of rubbish on the floor and you'll just walk past it, you won't pick it up. And then there's companies where people will pick up the rubbish. Now that's a metaphor for whether you're going to say, not my job, right? Not my role. I'm not going to do anything about that. Or you can be a leader and step up and do it anyway, because leaders do the work that needs to be done regardless of whether it's their job. And so for me, I would be pushing on the leadership team to get those clarified and start to break them out. And then part of it is a significant cultural change, because you've got to get those leaders to role model and embed that and start to have that be a living conversation. Not easy.
No, you're still with us? Next question. We have a few more minutes. There's one over there.
Great talk, Sue. 10-year horizons are incredible, like, periods of time, right? I'm just wondering, how do you continue the consistency in strategic thinking over that time frame when people change, leadership changes, all that kind of stuff? Like, how do you think across that horizon and maybe maintain consistency or the information in the organisation to keep that thinking and that focus going?
So there's so much wrapped up in that question. So number 1, 10-year horizons are a hard thing to manage, because especially in our world, tech changes so quickly, right? And if you're an agile company, and I don't mean agile as in the ceremonies or the methodology, I mean as in nimble. If you're a nimble company, you're going to be able to adapt to change no matter what comes at you, right? Whether it's stuff like COVID or something else, you will be able to adapt to change really quickly. And I could use the example of Netflix versus McGraw-Hill. McGraw-Hill has been a company that's been around since the 1800s, and they had 21,000 employees. Netflix had 10,000 employees. For change to happen at McGraw-Hill, it was long and lengthy, and they couldn't get out of their way. And we had a little incubator that started, and we got them out of the office so that we could start this thing. They lasted about 2-3 years before the big machine of McGraw-Hill got in the way and stopped that nimbleness. So part of it is about being nimble. Part of it, I think, is about striving for excellence, right? Like you as an individual, regardless of what's going on around the company culture, will you strive for excellence and do a phenomenal job and be a stunning colleague, no matter what, right? So that's another aspect of it. And the third aspect is the focus and the debate around strategy. So as teams, like one of the principles at Netflix was highly aligned, loosely coupled. We didn't sit down together to figure out plans and tactics across teams. We debated about strategy constantly, consistently, every single day. And we spent time over there with the other team getting to know what problems are you dealing with and how can I help you? How can I help unblock that? That's what we did all day, every day. And then the tactics and the day-to-day we figured out. So focus on the strategy, focus on the alignment and the relationships. Strive for excellence and be nimble. That's what I would say, regardless of 10 years, 5 years or whatever, right?
Thank you. So we have time just for last question, but there is a requirement. Can the question please come from a product manager?
Oh, there's only 2.
Is it? No, there are fewer there. Let's say
Or an
a
engineer.
few more seconds for the product manager. Are you a product manager? Yes.
Okay, let me think. I had it in my head. So, how would you go about championing, product management or product ways of working, especially in an organization that's deeply ingrained in, thinking in a project mindset? Because personally, going through the challenges with certain clients, and it's a tough nut to crack. And
It is.
trying to know at what levels you can actually be influential at and get the right buy-in to create that change is also a challenge.
Yeah, and it's really hard to do, especially if you don't have senior leadership support to move that, to transform to that way, right? And so my suggestion, and I'm certainly doing this in government, government's a hard nut to crack. Can I just tell you that? It doesn't matter the department, it's a hard nut to crack. But I would say meet the system where the system is. If the system is a feature factory, chip away at it. So you can introduce elements. You can introduce vision and strategy as a team together, collectively deciding at the team level. You can also introduce some aspects of discovery, like get out with your designer, right? And at first, just get out there. Then get more and more involved, right? Like learn that. It takes courage to learn it, especially like professionally. Often we feel the imposter syndrome is running riot if you don't know that thing. And you don't want to let anyone know you don't know that thing because professionalism. But the more you can just be transparent and say, I don't know that thing, but I want to get out there and learn. So lean into that, lean into learning, get out with your designers and partner with them, because there can be things that you can start to implement there. And I would suggest get into understanding that opportunity space. And by opportunity, most of you have probably read Teresa Torres. By opportunity, I mean not just problems, needs, desires, and opportunities, right? And don't just look at your current state. Look beyond that. Look at what's coming in the next 15 years. Look at your horizons for your industry. Look at the mega trends. Do your pestle, now steepled analysis. Like do all that. As a product manager, do the analysis so that you're well informed and bring that into your strategy conversations, and then do the opportunity analysis and at least some assumption mapping for discovery. So there's little things you can chip away at. And then my email is up on one of those slides. There is a pack that Pierre has,
Yes.
in case you need to email me further around that. Cool.
So everyone will be able to buy Supac letter for just $10 over the desk over there. We are joking. We will give it for free. Thank you so much, Sue.
Guys.